Hi guys, welcome back. I hope that you are staying warm. It is Sunday while I'm recording this and the snow is coming down pretty hard. So I think my snow dance worked maybe a little too well. So I have a feeling that we might see each other on Zoom more this week and not in the building for a couple of days, but we'll see. So keep an eye on the announcements every day this week. But anyway, today I'm here to talk to you about our new unit, Unit 7, which is on motivation and emotion. And I feel like this one we can connect with this year because I think a lot of us are struggling with motivation right now. So hopefully some of the things we talk about in this unit will be helpful to you. So we're going to jump right in. Today we're going to look at information from Module 37. So let's just start with the basics. In psychology, how do we define motivation? When we talk about motivation, we're talking about some drive that initiates, sustains, directs, or terminates certain actions. So you could think of it as the force directing a person to behave a certain way.
The force is strong in this one.
I like to think of The Office when Michael says,
"Why are you the way that you are?"
It's what makes us behave the way that we do. It has a major impact on everything that we do. Let's talk about 3 types of motives that we see. So the first, the most basic level, is biological motives. Those are things that are based on our needs for survival. So it's the idea that if we are hungry or thirsty or we need sleep, we are going to seek out those things. We're going to do what we need to do to get those things because we need them to survive. So that's a very basic level of motivation. And we all experience that every day. When you get hungry, you go find something to eat. Then the second type of motive is called stimulus. And this is a need for information, stimulation, or learning. So I think we can all agree that we don't particularly enjoy being bored.
Getting kind of bored.
So we have a need for stimulation and for something to grab our attention. It's not necessarily needed for survival, but it does seem to be something that all humans are born with. So stimulus motivation is also very, very common. And then the last form of motivation is called learned motivation. And these are referring to the learned needs, drives, and goals that we have in our lives. So for example, the need for power, the need to connect to other people, the need for approval, security, or status. Those are all types of learned motivations that we're not necessarily born with, but we are taught. Those are things that we need. Those are things that we should strive for. So within psychology, there are 5 major theories of motivation. So we're going to go through those today, and you're going to need to remember each one and how they are different. So we'll start the first one, which is called instinct theory. Instinct theory is very much based on biology and evolutionary psychology, and it's this idea that we have an inborn pattern of behavior that everyone in our species shares. That is what we mean when we say instinct. So when it comes to instinct theory, the idea is that humans are motivated by inborn automatic behaviors and urges. So that makes some sense, right? You think about, some examples are the need to find shelter, or seeking out warmth on a cold day, right? Some people would look at this as, maybe the need to have a family and procreate. But then wait a minute. Not everybody wants to have kids. Not everybody wants to get married and have a family. So this is a decent theory, but it definitely doesn't cover all types of behavior. It doesn't explain certain behaviors and certain differences of behavior within members of the same species. So now let's talk about another theory of motivation, and this is a very common one that you will see on the AP test, and this is drive reduction theory. So drive reduction theory, if you think of the name of this theory, you'll remember that there's a drive, there's something driving us to do something, and we are trying to reduce that drive. We're trying to fulfill that push, right? Whatever it's pushing us to do. So the idea behind drive reduction theory is that our behavior is mainly motivated by physiological needs. So for example, the need for food, right? We're hungry. So if we are hungry, then we are going to feel a drive, a push to go find something to eat, and then that will result in a behavior such as going out to McDonald's or going to the kitchen and opening the refrigerator and making ourselves a snack. And then the end goal is that we'll be satisfied, in this case, satiated. So this all stems from a desire for something called homeostasis, which you might have heard of in your science classes. So homeostasis is just sort of your body's idea of being in perfect balance, right? It's what we're always striving to get to. Our body's always trying to balance itself back out and get to homeostasis. So drive reduction theory is based on this idea of our body trying to seek out homeostasis. And when we're not in homeostasis, that's where that drive comes from. So when we're not in homeostasis, when we're hungry, when we have to use the restroom, when we're cold, then our body will create a drive to then push us to go do what we got to do to get back to homeostasis.
A baby's got to do what a baby's got to do.
Remember, in this theory, drives are internal stimuli that motivate behavior. But you might be thinking, well, wait a second, sometimes it's not an internal motivation that gets me to do something, but it's an external motivation. Good point. So let's talk about, whoa, hit my computer there. Let's talk about what that might entail. Let's break down different types of drives that we might be referring to when it comes to drive reduction. So first, our primary drives. Primary drives are things that are biologically connected to survival. They are physiological drives that help us to survive. So that is the things I keep saying: food, water, air, warmth. Those drives are biologically connected to survival. A secondary drive is something that helps us to attain the goal of a primary drive. So for example, earning money doesn't guarantee survival. It's not directly connected to survival, but having money to buy food, to purchase food and feed ourselves is a secondary way that we can reach the goal of fulfilling our hunger. Getting a job and earning money, that would be a secondary drive that's connected to the primary drive of needing food. Okay, so that's drive reduction theory. Now let's talk about those external motivators that I mentioned. If you were thinking, well, not all my motivation comes from within me, it's not, a lot of it comes from without. So then you might like incentive theory. And this comes from Edward Thorndike and B.F. Skinner, who we've already talked about. These are two behaviorists. So the focus here is on what might pull us to behave a certain way. So in contrast to drive reduction theory, where there's a push to behave a certain way, Thorndike and Skinner looked at what might pull us to behave in certain ways. So for example, maybe we have an academic incentive to earn a good grade, right? So we want that high GPA. We want to get into that college. We want to get into that program. So we're aiming for that good grade because of this external motivator. Or maybe, at work, we know that if we work a certain amount of hours and we get a certain amount of things accomplished, that we will get a bonus at work. So that's an economic incentive. Or maybe, it's Valentine's Day today. Maybe you have a romantic and social incentive to have a significant other, to be in a relationship with somebody else, because it gives you that social security. So incentive theory is looking at external stimuli that motivate our behavior. And for me, the perfect visual of this, the thing that I always think of, is the carrot on the stick dangling above you or in front of you. It's like, oh, I'm reaching out for that carrot. That's what's pushing me forward. That's what's getting me through. You could think of it as a light at the end of the tunnel kind of situation. But it's an external motivator that pulls our behavior in a certain direction. So again, this is a good theory. It makes sense in a lot of ways, but it doesn't explain all behavior. For example, what about altruistic behavior? When someone is doing something that they don't necessarily benefit from, that is for someone else, but not really doing much for them. In fact, maybe they're sacrificing something of their own or doing something inconvenient to them, but for the benefit of someone else. Incentive theory doesn't explain that. So let me give you a little bit more visual on this internal versus external drives versus incentives. So drives are internal. They are things that come from within us, like our need for oxygen, our desire to avoid pain, Hunger, thirst, those are internal drives. Incentives are external. They are things that we can get, that we are aiming for, and that pull our behavior in a certain direction. So getting a raise at work, getting a new car, starting a new relationship, earning a good grade, those are external motivators. So those are what we call incentives. And your teachers and the administrators at our school use incentives all the time, right? You get rewards for good attendance sometimes. You get cardinal bucks for good behavior. You get, sometimes some of your teachers have their own system where you can earn a free homework pass, or you can get a sticker or candy. You get some sort of reward for accomplishing something in their class. That's an example of an incentive. All right, our next theory is called Arousal Theory. And remember, when we talk about arousal, we're talking about this physiological state where we are aroused, we have our attention is focused, is captured, and our body is awake. So arousal theory suggests that we're motivated to seek the optimum level of arousal, of being alert. So again, this brings back something we've talked about several times. We've talked about the Yerkes-Dodson law of arousal. And so this is what that curve looks like, if you recall. And you'll notice that as a person's stress or anxiety increases, then at first their performance or efficiency, their ability to perform well, also increases. But then you get to this middle point, all right? And then after this, as the stress or anxiety continues to increase, suddenly the performance decreases and it drops back down. So what does this mean? Well, it means that over here we have, just a little bit of stress, a little bit of nerves, maybe a little bit of anxiety about something, but not over anxious, not overly stressed, just a little bit. So maybe we're just nervous. Well, that sometimes can make us perform better. A little bit of nerves makes us focus more. It makes us care about what we're doing.
Oh no. Okay, relax.
Mental, that one, I'm telling you.
And then we do a better job. So really, when we get to this midpoint, this is where we want to be. This is what we call the optimum level of arousal. But if we exceed that, if we get too excited, too nervous, too anxious, or too stressed, then we can't focus. We're all over the place. We might get too nervous, and then suddenly our performance goes out the window.
Oh, now I can relax.
And it's not good. So if our arousal is too high, then we'll be motivated to relax according to arousal theory. And if our arousal is too low, then we will be motivated to seek stimulation and more action. So this kind of goes back to sort of that idea we were talking about earlier of seeking out stimulation as a form of motivation. All right, and our fifth theory of motivation comes from our humanist perspective of psychology, specifically from Abraham Maslow, who many of you have heard of, and his hierarchy of needs. At the top of the hierarchy is self-actualization. So self-actualization theory suggests that we are motivated by our needs, but not all needs are created equal. So we want to satisfy those lower level needs first, and then get to the higher level, which ends with actualization. Okay, so let me show you what Maslow's hierarchy looks like. So basically, when we talk about Maslow's hierarchy, we like to think of it as a pyramid, and at the very bottom are the most basic needs, and then at the very top are the more complex needs that not everybody really is focused on all the time. So according to Maslow, the bottom level, the most basic human needs are our physiological needs. That's our need for food, water, and shelter. Sound familiar? We've been talking about that a lot. Okay, the next level up would be our safety needs. So things like protection, stability, avoidance of pain, and even a routine/order. Think back to last year around this time or right after February when all of our routines got tossed out of the window. That was really hard for everyone. So it is something that we need. We need that sense of order and routine to feel safe. So that is considered one of the safety needs. Next up is our need for love and belonging. All right, so remember our hand mnemonic. This is why humanistic is the ring finger, all right, because of this love and belonging connection. So this is kind of right in the middle. It's something that everybody needs and everybody's seeking to fulfill through affection, acceptance, and inclusion. So basically our social needs are right in the middle of Maslow's hierarchy. So according to Maslow, if you cannot meet your basic needs, physiological needs, or your safety needs, then you won't be thinking about love and belonging, or you won't be able to focus on that. So above love and belonging are things like esteem, our self-respect, our self-esteem, our sense of being respected by others. And then at the very top of Maslow's hierarchy is what we call self-actualization. And that's where this theory of motivation gets its name. So what is self-actualization? Basically, self-actualization is our idea of fulfilling our potential completely, being able to feel fulfilled, that we are doing everything that we can and want to do. So self-actualization, as you might have guessed by now, is hard to reach. It's very rare that someone gets to that level of Maslow's hierarchy. Maslow saw this as the peak of the quote-unquote mountaintop. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about some other terms that go with motivation. So when we talk about achievement, two things really push us towards our goals. So those are intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. We've kind of touched on these because it's similar to what we learned about with drive reduction theory. So intrinsic motivators are rewards that we get internally. So it would be something like enjoyment or satisfaction. So Miss Turner is motivated to create fun lessons because she enjoys making them, right? I am motivated to make slideshows that I think are visually very appealing because I just like it. I enjoy that. Extrinsic motivators are rewards that we get for our accomplishments from outside of ourselves. So this is something like earning a grade or getting a paycheck. And two things that are connected to extrinsic motivation are operant conditioning, which remember is a type of learning that occurs when you have either an appetitive or an aversive stimulus that then leads to reinforcement or punishment of a certain behavior. And then there's something that we call the over-justification effect that can happen with extrinsic motivators. So let me explain that. So the over-justification effect is what happens when we are being rewarded for doing something over and over again, and eventually we start to lose our intrinsic motivation to do that action. So let's say, for example, your mom gives you $5 because you were kind enough to help her out in the yard. So then you start to expect that every time, and even though the first time you were just helping because you wanted to help, you were being nice, and then your mom gave you that $5 and suddenly everything changed and now you're waiting for that $5. So you need more of a justification for you to do that chore now because you've lost the internal motivation to just do something nice, the intrinsic motivation. So that leads me to remind you of a mnemonic to remember these two terms. Intrinsic motivators are internal. Extrinsic motivators are external. In, X, X. All right, and that brings me to the end of today's notes. Tomorrow we will start talking about different types of motivation, such as hunger motivation, and we'll start kind of reviewing a few of our biological bases of behavior with that. So stay tuned. We'll see you back tomorrow. Bye!